Definitely should know the factors that affect the size of a population, like immigration and emigration, and the differences between them. Which one is when people come in and which one is when people leave. Okay, here's a definition of fitness. It is the contribution of a genotype or phenotype to the genetic composition of subsequent generations. That's the answer. It's basically your ability to be able to survive. But we will definitely cover that more in evolution and will not be on this unit's exam. For number 31, you can have through oceans, from the land, you can have through humans, on wood products, maybe ornamental plants or pets. There are maybe other answers as well. Chapter 45 is another important chapter with some important vocabulary and concepts. An ecotone is a boundary basically between two different ecosystems. And there's an example there. Maybe it's the border between a grassy area and the forest. So that area between them is called the ecotone. Another term you should know is succession. It's a process of change. You can have primary succession and secondary succession. Primary succession occurs in land that has never been, nothing has ever grown there before. Secondary succession occurs after a disaster and it's regrowing back to its stable state. Sometimes the original community will not be restored back to its original state because maybe the disturbance was just so extreme. And then you have different species that might not have been there before invading. And so, yes, the original community is not always restored. Okay, you definitely need to understand food webs. First, some basic stuff. You need to understand which way the arrow is going. The arrow points toward the organism that is going to eat it. Another thing you need to understand is that you only get 10% of the energy from the level below you. That's the amount of energy that's available. That's why the larger the organism is, the more it needs to eat because it's not getting a lot of energy from the food below him. You need to understand and be able to look at a food web and see, okay, where are the producers? Where are the herbivores? You need to know all these terms. Consumers, secondary consumers, etc. And then lastly, you also need to understand, and you can see these answers here, what will happen if I remove, or all the elk got hunted, or whatever. So you need to understand what would happen to the food web if one of those organisms became extinct or gone. Okay, for water affects all populations. It just depends on the type of population that it can be. For nutrient availability, it can affect the structure of food webs, obviously. It provides stability to populations. For nesting materials and nesting sites, obviously being reproductive and being successful at it is required for the stability of the population. So they need an adequate nesting site and they need materials to do that. Okay, for biotic factors, you have food chains and food webs. They definitely affect the stability of the population because if the population's food options are pretty low, then obviously the stability of the population would be not very stable. Obviously, species diversity is going to be awesome for a population. It's going to create more food options. Population density, it depends on how dense, I guess, the population is, but obviously when it gets too much, it's going to run out of resources, and then that's where you hit that carrying capacity. Algae blooms are negative effect on populations because they deplete the oxygen in the water, and they make toxins. Okay, for number 38, you were supposed to choose one human impact and discuss how the impact accelerates change for populations. I'm not going to read through these, but you can see, you can read through them on your own, and nothing like this would be on the exam, but you should just know which human impacts are possible. So here's a section on slash and burn agriculture. Urbanization and monocropping and infrastructure development. Same thing for 39. You were supposed to choose one of the introduced species and how it can devastate native species. So this is information on Dutch elm disease. Nothing like this would be on there on your exam. Here's information on potato blight, if you've ever heard of that. And the virus smallpox. Okay, there's a couple topics in chapter 46 that are important. I would guess the most important one would be the cycles. And so when we get to 41, that one would be the most important. But there are a couple other topics as well. Okay, number 40, identify one reason why NPP is higher by the equator. Just so you know, NPP is net primary productivity, like how much energy is being produced by the plants. It's related to photosynthesis, and it's higher by the equator because there are more sunlight, which means you're going to get more photosynthesis, and there's lots of rain, produces lots of water. The trees do very well by the equator. Okay, so for the three main biogeochemical cycles, you need to know the different processes that occur in each one. And so for the water cycle, for the fluxes, you should have evaporation, precipitation, transpiration, and weathering, and then you should understand what those four things are. The pools for the water cycle are listed there. You might not have had them all, and you don't need them all, but you should be aware of all the different pools where the water would be. And then the sinks aren't as important as the fluxes in the pool. So you definitely would say that this first column is the most important, and then just being aware of the second column as well. All right, for the carbon cycle, processes are the fluxes would be photosynthesis, respiration, humans provide carbon, the atmosphere and by the ocean, microbes do respiration and decomposition. And then you have your list of pools and sinks. And then for the nitrogen cycle, you have nitrogen fixation done by microbes. You have the denitrification, decomposition, assimilation. Please go back and look at those processes to get a little bit more detail on those. We will see a little bit more of that later on in the year as well. All right, number 42, it says excess nitrates or nutrients running into a body of water can create a huge bloom of algae. Explain how the overabundance of algae can lead to a zone of, it's called an anoxic zone, which means there's no dissolved oxygen in there. So nitrogen is nice to have in a body of water, but too much of it is too bad. So it results in rapid growth of algae, but respiration is still occurring. And so oxygen just goes down. And so fish, crustaceans, and other populations are just going to crash in that area where this is occurring at. Okay, this concept should have been learned in regular bio. I know I cover it. It says, although nitrogen in the atmosphere is 78%, it's often a limiting nutrient in ecosystems. And that's because nitrogen in the atmosphere is not usable by plants or animals. We need to make it usable, and that's what the nitrogen cycle does by nitrification. So it's nice we need that nitrogen also. So we need that constant supply of nitrogen in fertilizers. And so that's why we add it. Nitrogen-rich fertilizers to crops, it makes sure that if it is low in that nutrient, and it won't affect their productivity. Okay, for 44, calculate the percent increase in carbon dioxide from 1980 to 2010. In 1980, it was 335. In 2010, it was 385. Subtract that out, and you get a 50 increase over the 30-year time span. 50 out of 335 is a 15% total increase. The reason why they talk about carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas the most is because it remains in the atmosphere for a long, long time. And so because it's there and in our atmosphere for a long, long time, it becomes more problems. It's related to the greenhouse effect, and it's also a contributor to global warming. And that finishes up our study guide.